Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am really in anticipation of a really great discussion we're going to have with some folks about what life has been like over the last year or so with people in home, with teenagers in home. Some of you familiar with those video clips we just played in the last year. Parents invaded TikTok, the social media outlet for teens, or so I've heard. Tonight we're discussing what we've heard from Colorado parents about their relationship with teens during the pandemic and what happens next. And that's really sort of the critical issue here, particularly in light of the pandemic. Now that the vaccines are here, things are shifting. Many schools and workplaces and other activities are in person again. I'm in our newsroom. There's people back behind me as well. There's great hope for a future back to some version of normal. But when our lives are quote unquote normal again, there are some things we've learned, some things we've gained during these unusual times, and many of those things many of us don't want to lose. For many parents, it's an increased feeling of connection with our teens. Is definitely one of those feelings of connection that we've really gained. A lot of families have gained over the last year. We'll talk more about that and what we can do about that tonight. My name is Chris Vanderveen. On behalf of 9 News, I'm really pleased to help host this discussion in partnership with Colorado's Forward Together campaign. Also joining us is Dr. Cheryl Ziegler, who is the founder of Child and Family Therapy Center at Lowry. She's also our parenting expert here on 9 News. For anyone who's joining us via Facebook or YouTube, you can drop questions for Dr. Ziegler. She's the expert here, ain't me, in the comment section. As we begin this discussion, it can be helpful, if not motivational, to remember why it matters so much that we work with connecting with our youth. Dr. Ziegler, let's start out and talk to us a little bit about that connection, why that's so important.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here too. I can't wait to have this conversation. So I think when we first start thinking about teenagers and adolescents, you think about what stage they're going through, which is all about independence. And what we know is that it's a parent's challenge to balance their independence as well as still being, though, the influencer in their lives. So I think that one of the things parents really want to know is what the research says, which is the better relationship an adolescent or teenager can have with an adult. That doesn't have to be a parent. That can be a grandparent, a coach, an uncle, whoever it is, an aunt. But the stronger the relationship they can have with an adult figure in their life, the outcomes are tremendous. They have greater resiliency. They make better choices around drugs, sex, relationships. And so they're happier, they have greater self-esteem. Really, the list is pretty long. And so it really does just take one person and one positive connection. And so I think that we all want that for our kids. We want our kids to be happy and healthy. So it's a really good time to be reflecting on how to keep the connection as life opens up and teens get back to going back to their independent adolescent time post-pandemic.
I love that talk about, here we are in this sort of, a lot of people have sort of talked about it, the great reset, that things are going to change and things are going to change in great large ways that we really haven't experienced for a year and a half. We've had some connections that worked over the last year and a half, some connections that we struggle with. So let's talk more about that. Colorado's Forward Together campaign recently talked with dozens of teens and parents across the state to check in on how they're doing and what they're experiencing. One of the surprising themes that came out of those conversations was that despite many of the hardships that teens and parents experienced during the pandemic, many of them also felt like they'd become closer, and they feared what that meant when life returns to normal. They're not around each other as much, and they might lose some of that connection. So let's welcome into this discussion a Colorado parent and teen for some additional perspective. Dave Romero from Lakewood is joining us with his 14-year-old daughter, Maddie. Dave and Maddie, let's start by talking about the successes that you have had. It sounds like you've had a lot of successes, but talk to us about those successes you've had during the pandemic and what you feel like you can offer other folks who are listening in right now.
Well, thanks for having us, Chris. I think one of the positive impacts that we were able to have with our family was just putting it in perspective of knowing that this time in our life was going to be something that was memorable, and for us to take it on as a challenge, for us to make it a positive, impactful way. So I started my business, my contracting business, just this last year. So we were worried about what kind of effect that would have, and having Maddie be in school at home. And so when there was opportunities for her to come work with me, I brought her along with me. So we were able to work together, spend a lot of time together, being able to sit in the truck and bond together, work on projects, and just kind of just learn more about each other.
And what a great opportunity that is as a parent to sort of have that time. Look, everyone knows this was an incredibly challenging time for parents and for teens. Maddie, I'm curious your perspective on all of that. As a 14-year-old, you're going to be going to high school soon. You've had this year and a half in your home with your parents and sort of like living out that sort of challenge. What's that been like? And how has that changed or sort of enhanced your relationship with your father?
I mean, in the beginning of the pandemic, it definitely was challenging being home a lot all the time, but the support from my family and friends, and like knowing that I can go and spend time with my dad and like learn new things and learn more stuff about him has just been really helpful during these hard times.
What'd you learn about your dad? What did you learn about your dad that you maybe didn't know?
Just how hard he works and as much as he does for our family, and he showed me a lot of new things about like his contracting business and brought me into cryptocurrencies. And
Dave, I'm curious from your perspective, what have you seen and what have you noticed what do you think has been the most challenging aspect from a father's perspective on being a parent in this time with a child who is just with a teenager who is just not going through what we all experienced when we were sort of in 7th and 8th grade? It's been a very different experience for lots of parents and lots of teens and children as well. What's that been like for you?
It's definitely been different because very sports oriented family. And so not being able to see Maddie have a regular volleyball season or basketball season or participate in those sporting events that we're normally used to. And her not hanging out with her friends was definitely a challenge. So I think we try to make our home life a little bit more exciting, just because we knew that we had to do something that was a little bit different, a little bit more fun.
So what you told us before, what'd you guys do to do that?
We would have in the evening, we would jam out to music and just kind of have a dance party in the kitchen that you see behind Maddie right there, and just kind of jam out to different music.
Maddie, how do you think this experience has been for teens and over the last year? I'm sure you've talked to people that have had successes. I'm sure you've talked to people that have struggled. What have you noticed are there any sort of common themes that develop with people that you know and friends that you know?
I know a lot of people, since having like more time to themselves, have like had like developed their own personalities and like just had more time to like think to themselves. And I know some people that have struggled with it, having more time home alone, because sometimes home is not like a good place for a bunch of people in school as an escape. But I know that like things got hard, like definitely in the beginning, but I think now that things are getting back to normal and getting back to school is good.
Are you looking forward to getting back to school?
I am, yeah, because of sports and like getting able to see like all my friends again.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to bring you back in, but I want to turn it back to Dr. Ziegler and talk about what parents and other adults can do to connect with their teens. Dr. Ziegler, first, why is right now, as we're emerging from the pandemic, such an important time for parents to work on their relationships with their teens?
Well, anytime we're in a kind of transition and change, you really want to be mindful. So it's almost like thinking about, when your child's had their first day of kindergarten, their first day of middle school, high school. There's just certain things that we pay extra attention to, but we've never been through a pandemic before. So right now is the time. What I think I've been sharing with a lot of people is there's a concept called post-traumatic growth. And it's really a time that after something traumatic has happened. So no matter what people experience individually, as a collective, as a community, we've all gone through together a traumatic experience. And we know that there have been tremendous mental health outcomes the unintended consequences of this pandemic. And so the notion of post-traumatic growth says not just resilience, where you're going to bounce back to. That's resilience. It's the bounce back. But grow. Where are you going to grow? And so I think for parents who did connect more with their teens, or they did have lighter times, or they really bonded or played games together, they talked more, whatever it was, took lots of walks together, whatever it might have been, you want to try to keep an element of that into the relationship. Otherwise, we're all creatures of habit. And what we do is we go back to what we're used to. There's a term that says when we stress, we regress. And so I have had, just as recently as this week, clients say to me, oh yeah, whatever it is, whether it's a partner or it's a child, so-and-so seems to be going back to their old ways, or these things are happening again. So if you don't really work on it, you're going to go back to whatever place you were. And I think instead we have an opportunity to really grow.
It's nice to view this as an opportunity. And here we are sort of like shifting in this other great shift that's taking place again, when life is slowly returning back to that sort of normal. Parents have really embraced, to some extent, that idea of being able to have that connection. At an age when connection can sometimes be difficult, but Forward Together has found that parents and that connection, while it's there in physical spirit and it's there all the time and it's good in many ways, they don't necessarily feel as deeply connected, and they still struggle with that. What do you think that's about?
Yeah, I really want to highlight what you're saying right now, because I think that one of the interesting experiences of this pandemic is the way that I put it a lot is that we were all in the same storm, but in very different boats. And we don't know what the next boat was going through, right? All we know is our own experience. So there may have been families who really did bond in a very meaningful way throughout this. There may have been families who spent a lot of physical time together, but emotionally were going through their own struggles and stresses, or, teens were spending lots of time in their room, sort of in the dark in front of a screen. And then we have families who, we have new parents, we have people home with babies, toddlers. There's a huge spectrum of what individually we went through. So I think it's really important to know that while you're physically together, that doesn't mean that you necessarily connect and bond. You have to put the effort in toward being present. You have to practice that. And parents ask me all the time, how does someone become present? And some of the things are really simple. I mean, it really can be just a matter of, put the phone down, give each other eye contact, talk to each other about one another's day before you go into making demands. So there are really some pretty simple, small adjustments we can do to connect with one another during this time of change.
It's so easy, and I love hearing that from you, because you're here the expert. And yet it's one of those things that we all know we need to do more of, and yet it's just so challenging. So let's talk about some specifics that we can take. And while we're at it, for our audience on Facebook, if you have something you can share, feel free to add it. We'll try to get some of those questions at the end. But let's talk, Dr. Ziegler, about some of those specific actions that adults can take in this environment that we're in right now.
Yeah. So there's a couple of key ones that we know are really effective and that we can all start doing tonight, but you have to practice. And I always say, don't expect a miracle to happen overnight, and don't think because you did it once, it worked or it didn't. This is something we really, truly have to practice. But the very first thing is squeeze in some talk. Find your opportunities to connect. This can be while you're driving in the car. It's probably one of my favorite places for parents and teens to connect. Maybe, don't look at your phone at every stoplight, or turn the radio off, and just actually talk, or turn the radio on and jam and sing together, whatever that might be. Your own kid and your relationship, but really find those opportunities to ask your kid questions. If, you still go in and to their room at night, which I really suggest that parents do, bedtime is a great time. They don't have to be toddlers. You don't have to be reading them bedtime stories. And nighttime is just a good time to kind of check in and be like, hey, and notice something. I noticed you look pretty happy today, or I noticed that it looks like something's bothering you. I noticed you seem to be texting a lot on the phone. So make an observation so that they know you're paying attention. So that's one thing that they can do, right? So simply put, find time to talk, be intentional about it. The second one is let your kid know that you care. And again, I know that probably sounds simple. And I'd say anybody watching right now thinks, I don't just care about my child. I love my child. They're my world. I love them so much. However, when the hustle and bustle of stress and life goes on, we don't always maybe take the time to do that, or we don't appreciate the stage of development that the teenager is in. They need to hear that they are loved. They need to see that they're loved. They need to feel it. And I do lots of family therapy, and I can't tell you how many times teenagers will say, I don't even know if my parents really care. And, they're usually really shocked to hear that. So just make sure that you kind of know your own child. Sometimes when I'm working with families, I say, know each other's love languages, right? There's 5 love languages, and know it, because not everybody receives love in the same way. So figure out how your kid receives love. Is that quality time? Is it compliments? Is it gifts? Is it compliment, whatever it might be, pointing positive things out, and make sure to do that every day. And I would say another tip, a third tip written down here, is when we are not around them, right, and we're not in the same space as them, think about ways to connect. Think to yourself, what could I do? What could we do this weekend, tonight? So a good example is, I think this is a good example all the time, but during the pandemic, lots of us were binging, right? We were watching shows on different streaming channels. And what we came to find out was that sometimes a family of 4 might have been in 4 different rooms watching 4 different shows. So that's just a little example, but can you find a show together that you can watch? Can you find something maybe that's happening in world events that you guys can talk about at dinner? Can you have dinner together? Whether it's, can you cook dinner that night, or bring it in, or have your teen make, some of the salad and you bring home a chicken, whatever it's going to be. Really be planning and thoughtful. How can we get together? I think another example is around chores. Lots of times, especially by the time a kid's a teenager, parents are tired. If they're coming home from work, they want them to do something. So maybe do part of it with them. When it comes, I have a teenager too. I usually, start unloading the dishwasher with her. Just because it's actually really, truly a natural time. We just start talking, we might start joking, whatever, we might start planning for the day. So when you're not with your kid, just think about what can I do tonight with them? Because that's oftentimes a good way to connect with teens.
I want to bring Dave and Maddie back in if we can, and ask them their thoughts about, particularly on that third issue that Dr. Ziegler just raised, about connecting when you're not physically there, or connecting when you're not mentally there. What's some good tips that you guys have found over the last year, and things that you plan on bringing about in the next few months to sort of like enhance that communication between you two?
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So how do we, what have you learned over the last year and communication techniques that you'll sort of stay present and find those opportunities that Dr. Ziegler mentioned in terms of building that connection and making sure that connection doesn't drop away as more things happen in life and more things happen in our lives that are outside of the home? What would it be some advice that both of you might have?
I think for me, it would be kind of a combination of what we've went through in regards to having a work experience together, as well as building in back to the sporting events. So, bringing Maddie to some volleyball games, playing basketball outside with each other, and just spending that time just showing her different skills and giving her opportunities to kind of, connect with me.
Maddie, same thought.
Yeah, just the same thing, just spending time together, like outside of the house, or like doing fun things, and other than like day-to-day things, and just having fun together, especially during this hard time.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. And I think it's all like sort of like, it's like trial by experiment to some extent, but some of the same instincts sort of kick in as parents and teens that we sort of have relied on for a long time. We can figure this out. I mean, we figured out, if we can figure out the last year and a half, we can figure out hopefully the next year and a half. I want to pose some questions to Dr. Ziegler in a moment. But just before we get to that, we want to highlight our parents here tonight, just a few of the resources on the Forward Together Colorado website that might be helpful. First of all, there are some conversation starter digital cards with questions you can ask your team to get a conversation started. There are some tips on how to approach conversations with your team. There's also some examples of ways that you can be a better listener for your teen. And then there's advice, because honestly, we could all use better advice on that, to be truthful. And then there's advice on how to help your teen when they're facing challenging emotions like stress, anxiety, sadness, or disappointment. There's lots of good stuff to check out on forwardtogetherco.com. That's forwardtogetherco.com. So these are just a few of the recommended articles. And one more important note for parents. If at any point your teen are struggling and you think you might need more help or just want someone to talk to find out where to get some professional support, remember always that you can text or call Colorado Crisis Services. The website is coloradocrisisservices.org. That's coloradocrisisservices.org. You can also call 844-493-8255. That's 844-493-8255, or text TALK, T-A-L-K, to 38255. That's TALK to 38255. It's the time, and I want to remind everybody that there's, by all means, ask away, ask some questions that you have. The best way to do that is by Facebook, and we'll try to get to some of those questions if we get the opportunity and the moment to do that. But Dr. Ziegler, something that I find fascinating about this environment that we're in, no matter, this is true for parents of teens, this is true for teens, this is true for all of us, by the way, that this really is sort of the great reset. We really have that opportunity. And if we view it as an opportunity, as opposed to sort of like something to be scared of, even though there's lots of things that are coming our way that's going to be intimidating and scary. Like just being out in a crowd for the first time for me was a little bit more intimidating than I would have expected. But when you're telling parents, as they view this opportunity, what's the one really opportunity that they really should take hold of and say, what I'm going to work on in the next 6 months is this? What would you tell them?
It's a great question, Chris. I would say that the greatest lesson, at least from my lens, which is mental health, would be connection. What got us in the mental health crisis that we are still currently in, right? So reminder that Children's Hospital here in Colorado is called a mental health crisis, a state of emergency. What got us here, the number one thing was isolation and loneliness. And so I think if there is a great lesson to be learned is we may have heard before this pandemic the importance of connection, the importance of community. But until we got into this situation and we felt what it was like to not be physically around other human beings, or to actually even be scared to be within 10 feet of other human beings, and to be very isolated in a room, and to even get tired of technology. I had so many teens say to me, I started seeing teens in the park because they couldn't take telehealth anymore even. They were like, I'm tired of being on a screen. And so we started meeting in parks, and that was very, fulfilling for them. The greatest thing we could do is to go to our communities, to create communities, to value our friendships, to not let them go by the wayside, or to say we're too busy or anything like that, but to understand that it literally is the difference between being mentally well right now and being mentally ill right now is truly that connection. So I'd say it's the greatest lesson we've gotten from this.
Some things have come in on Facebook, and I want to ask, in terms of a lot of parents, teens have faced mental health challenges. What's the advice for parents facing their own stress and anxiety that is affecting their relationship with the teen? Rightly so. We talk a lot about teenagers and the stress that they've been through, but parents have been dealing with just an unprecedented level of stress, and that can certainly impact their relationship with their teen. How do they sort of avoid some of the pitfalls that you see?
Yeah, this is another really great question. And, I could talk for a long time about it, but I won't. But the first thing I want to say is thank you for asking the question, because I think that many parents feel like we just had to put the brave face on and just keep marching forward and be really positive and neglect our own needs. And that right there has to stop. That has to be one of the lessons we also take from this, which is self-care is so important. You can't take care of your family in the way that you want to if you are not well yourself. And so self-care is number one, meaning if you're a woman, go get your mammogram. If you're a man and you need to, have a prostate check, do that. Everything from taking care of your medical needs that we know this, right? That over the last year and a half, so many people have missed their well checks. They've missed their, regular screenings, everything from just taking the time to say, my health is important. I do need to do this. But also saying, I need to exercise. I need to take a walk. Saying to your kids, you don't want them to be in a crisis level, but you can say to them, this is really hard. We have financial stresses. We have these kinds of things. We're doing the best we can, but I may not be my best every day. But even on those days, I want you to know that I love you and I care about you. And I'm going to dedicate, I promise you that I'm going to work on taking care of myself, but I can't promise you that every day I'm going to be happy or positive or that I'm going to get good news. So I think that, this pandemic, it really gives parents an opportunity to be very real with their kids and to take care of themselves first, because I think many people actually felt it. If you didn't take care of yourself and you've been neglecting yourself mentally or physically, you're really not at your best for your family. And so I hope people really will take that lesson forward and make that a standard of parenting all the time.
My wife and our family have sort of come up with this saying of it's okay to admit that things aren't okay, and it's sort of this important realization that things are tough, and things are challenging, and some days are better than others, and some moments are better than others, and some moments are worse than others, and it's okay to say that it's not okay, because it's been, I talk about a challenging year. It's been challenging, and I wonder as we make that transition, Dr. Ziegler, to this life's back to normal again, whatever normal means, and people rush back to sort of questions. To activities. We got a question about: is it time to sort of think about limiting extracurricular activities, balancing time together versus time with peers? I mean, people are going to be anxious to get out. We've already seen it, and so where's that healthy line before rushing back too much, and finding and then leaving some parents maybe feeling left alone, but also wanting to encourage that idea that life is returning back to normal and things can be done the way you want them to be done? Where do you sort of find that line?
Yeah, I'm glad someone mentioned that, because I did fail to say that. And it's really important, like Maddie, she's excited to get back to basketball and volleyball. It's clear she loves it. It's clear her family totally supports it. They're all in. That's great. Doesn't sound to me like that's an overscheduling kind of situation. However, there are millions of other parents throughout the country that do overschedule their kids. They overschedule their lives, their social lives, their work lives, their kids' activities. And I have said that this is a great time to really evaluate, what do you need to learn to say yes to, right? Yes to volleyball and basketball, because those are your passions, right? And what do we need to say no to? Do you have to do 3 sports? Do you have to take piano? Do you need to learn a second language? Do you really need to, be the class parent? Do you need to do those things? This is a great time. I will even share, for me, I was asked at my kid's school to be the PTA vice president and then an incoming president for 2 years. And this gave me an opportunity to say, no, this isn't a great time. I think if it wasn't for the pandemic, I probably would have been very overwhelmed and still said yes. Or I would have really considered it more. This was quick for me. Like, I can't go back to that. I cannot have the fall come and have my kids, really super scheduled and then overschedule myself. So I think this is also not just the great reset, but the great opt out. What do you need to opt out of? Opt out.
Isn't that so true? I think what's been nice, and my wife and I have noticed it, our 11-year-old daughter noticed it, we lived a life without a lot of obligations over the last year and a half. In some ways it was hard, and it was, we missed people in our lives, but in some ways it was nice to not have all of those obligations. And for those among us that find it difficult to say no, it's going to be challenging over the next year to sort of find that sort of safe spot where we feel good and comfortable with where we're at. I do want to ask you another question that came in, Dr. Ziegler, and I think this is a realistic scenario too. What if the relationship was strained and not improved? It was a tough relationship. We obviously see Dave and Maddie, and they've got a great relationship. But I guarantee there's families, there's families out there that have had a tough time of it over the last year. As the things open back up again, what's your advice? How can it get better? And will space maybe potentially help those situations?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because there are so many people that are in that situation, whether it's the relationship with their teenager or marriages, things like that. Not everything was better. And so, of course, in my field, I see probably lots of the families where they struggled with something. And this is one aspect. So one of the things that I have really been encouraging the families that I'm working with is to say to your child, say to your teen, whoever you're talking about, this was a really hard year and a half for us. And I wish that it could have been different, right? Because right now we haven't even mentioned the fact that there's so many people that have been affected by loss. We haven't said the word loss and grief, and I'd be remiss not to say that. And so there are people who have lost others and are grieving people. They've lost parents, grandparents, sisters, brothers. And so you can say whatever it is, right? Say it. Actually, first of all, just say it, acknowledge it. I'm grieving, or I'm angry because I lost my job, or I'm resentful because I had to leave my job because only one of us could go to work and one of us had to stay home. We know that millions of women left the workforce to stay home. Whatever you want to say, right? That's appropriate to say to your child, and say, maybe we weren't both at our best, but we have this opportunity to move forward together. And what can we do? We're not going to physically be around each other as much. And maybe that, and you can say to them, right? I like to be light especially when I'm with teens. Maybe some of that's going to be good for us, but when we are together, I want to make sure we're making the best of it. And in order to do that, you have to be two things. You have to be vulnerable, and you have to be courageous to admit whatever, didn't go well, and then intentional. I want to have a good relationship with you. I want us to be stronger. I don't want the summer to go and I hardly see you, and then school to start and we just go back to the way we were. I want this to be better. I think those are conversations that actually many teens would be really open to, but probably a parent needs to lead that.
I love what you said. I love what you said there. And I also love this idea of, to me, vulnerability and courage go hand in hand. And it's so fascinating to see that there is courage in admitting vulnerability. And I think that's such a great lesson over the last year too. I do want to talk about, we in our newsroom have talked a lot about long term. I mean, maybe things that we're going to be, I'm always struck by the pandemic that we went through this giant social experiment for a year and a half without really any preparation. We got into March of last year, and all of a sudden we said, okay, we're closing things down. Kids aren't going to school. Sports are done. Activities are done. You're staying home. And then we slowly started to open it back up. We've talked a lot in our newsroom about the long-term impact, particularly for kids and teens. Where do you see that sort of long-term impact sort of bubbling to the surface? And do you anticipate that this will be a short ripple and that we'll get through this and life will turn back to normal fairly quickly? Or do you think we're going to be feeling the ramifications of this from a mental health perspective for some time to come?
Yeah, this is something that's being highly researched and talked about right now as we speak. I've seen minimal figures saying there'll be a 3-year ripple effect, and I've seen it up to 7-year ripple effect. I've also read some stats that say that for this generation, Generation Z, that they will be less educated and make less money over their entire lifetime as a result of the pandemic. So there's educational outcomes, there are mental health outcomes, there are economic outcomes. And so this is huge. This isn't going away anywhere. So yes, fall might come and kids might get back in school, with or without masks, who knows? But what's going to happen is, especially for kids that are school age, that educational impact we know is going to be there, and it's going to be very, very serious. And so then that has an impact on teachers and how they teach. And we know that our kids, just like parents, they're usually only as healthy as the healthiest parent. Same thing with teachers. So it actually is really looking to be a pretty catastrophic, really ripple effect that could be anywhere from 3, 5, 7 years or more, and in some ways a lifetime.
That's sobering when you hear like sort of on the minimal end 3 years. I mean, it's sort of a stark figure. I do want to change gears because I think we're going to about wrap it up. And by the way, I love the fact that Dave and Maddie's dog, I believe his dog, made a cameo in the Facebook Live. So that's awesome, by the way, because if you heard that bark back, it was Dave and Maddie's dog. But I want to leave with a positive. Let's talk about where this goes in a positive direction. Let's leave with some closing thoughts. And Dave and Maddie, I'm going to start with you. You guys have listened a lot, and thank you so much for your perspective. What's your sort of positive takeaway over the last year, and where do you hope to grow in the next year?
The positive takeaway is just that this is just a time in our lives that we're never going to forget. And, back to the idea of being able to spend time with Maddie and just our family in general, just knowing like, hey, we can take a negative perspective and we can take a positive perspective. And obviously every day is not going to be the same. There's going to be times we're going to struggle financially, emotionally, physically, but how do we make that negative and learn from it and grow from it? So I think just the attitude is something that we're learning together going through this, because we were obviously, like you're saying, we're not prepared for this. So how do we move forward? How do we continue to grow? How do we learn from that? And then the thing that we're going to take away with it is just the bond, like the thing that, Maddie helped me initially with starting my business this last year when the pandemic started. And that'll be something that I'll never forget with her.
Really cool. Dr. Ziegler, I want to ask you the same question. What are you going to take out of this on a positive note that we can all learn from?
So I got to, as Dave was talking, I got to write down some of my thoughts because I really do see positives. So one of them is the shift to digital health, the shift to telehealth, telemedicine, the fact that you can see a doctor anywhere, from anywhere, and have access is unbelievable. And that has grown exponentially, is only going to get better and more efficient. So I'm really, really positive about, feeling really positive about telehealth in general and how that's going to change lives. The second thing is there have been opportunities for companies and entrepreneurs to grow. And I think that for like someone like Maddie, kids might have been able to see their parents shift and come up with plan B real fast and see resilience and grit in action. And so I know for me, I get to speak now to people all around the world during the pandemic. Oh my gosh, all these countries I got to speak to people. I would never, prior to the pandemic, that was not a reality. Maybe I would have had 1 or 2 of those in maybe my lifetime, because I would have been thinking you have to fly somewhere. And now it's just as simple as a Zoom. So I think that's been incredible. And I hope that all the entrepreneurs and growing entrepreneurs really see this as the sky's the limit. You dream it, you can probably make that happen. And I think, maybe the third and fourth combined is just, I think people in general have a sense of renewed gratitude for the little things, hugs, right? How many videos have you seen of the first time a mother and, her elderly mother hugged for the first time, or a grandparent seeing their baby, and just touch and hugs and lunches and kisses, those kinds of things. So I hope that we maintain that, we carry that gratitude for the simple things in life.
We were trapped in a world that was moving too fast, and the last year and a half did force us all to slow down. And I think that's a great sort of lesson, and appreciate the smaller things in life, and appreciate just sort of the little moments that I guarantee every family, my family included, we're going to have moments we're going to look back on and say, boy, that one night that we did absolutely nothing, but we had a great time and we laughed and we did something stupid, was like the greatest memory that we'll sort of share. And it's really neat to sort of have those moments in life. So thank you so much, Dave and Maddie, Dr. Ziegler, for joining us. I can't thank you enough for those words, really wise words. And we wish everyone the best in the coming months. And please stay safe, stay connected, and good night.